Welcome, everybody. So lovely to have you with us again for our regular every 2 week meeting of a Solidarity Prepping Group. Another little change of pace this time around. So, this is the beginning of our peer seminars today. So, from now on, moving forward over the next few weeks, uh, one of us will be presenting on something we know, some knowledge or wisdom that we have, something we have learned, something that we would like to share with others. We've had lots of conversations historically about what's the type of information that we feel we're craving, what are we preparing ourselves for, where are our curiosities. So we've made a great long list of topics that we'd like to dive deeper into, and this we are now at the beginning of those deeper dives. So this today, before we get started, the outline agenda for today is going to be a presentation from Ben. There'll then be an opportunity to ask some questions of him. You'll then go into breakout rooms, possibly for about half an hour, small groups to talk about how you might apply what you've heard, so how you've been affected by what Ben has shared with you and whether or not you feel that has relevance and value for you in the context in which you are in. And then we'll come back together at the very end of the meeting to just share any aha moments and any final comments and checkouts. But before we do any of that, and I hand over to Ben, as is customary at these groups, at our solidarity prepping groups, we will do check-ins. And I think because there's so many of us here, perhaps we'll do this in two breakout rooms. So very briefly and for about 10 minutes. It would be lovely if each of you could just share a little bit about how you are as you come into this space. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. We could easily get lost in long reflections, but it would be lovely just to hear a few words, maybe a minute each, of just how are you as you come into this space together? How are you this Saturday morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where in the world you find yourselves? So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Ben. Ben very generously offered to be the first cab off the rank in terms of our peer presentations. So from memory, Ben's going to talk to us about community preparedness and resilience. So Ben, when you're ready, maybe you can start with introducing yourself.
Yeah.
Some of the people
Yeah.
on the screen weren't here last week, so they won't have had the benefit of meeting you yet.
Of course, of course. All right. So I'm going to share and let's see, make sure that goes right. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So my name is Ben. The so this set of slides that I'm going to talk to is really geared toward kind of an introduction to kind of exposing people to how to manage predominantly through a sudden loss of a services, power, water, the sort of things that you might lose during a natural disaster. My background is a drinking water engineer. I focus on risk and resilience of water supply systems here in the US. I've been doing that work for 20 years or so, and through that, I've become quite familiar with the potential fragility of the systems that we rely on um, for our daily needs. And so, certainly there's sounds like there's a lot of people on here that are further down that path of self-sufficiency. And so some of this stuff is going to be very basic and it's very high level and is probably just touching on scratching the surface. But, you know, originally had put it together to give people who maybe haven't thought about it at all kind of that first step to like, okay, what do I do if I don't have water for 3 days? What do I do if I don't have power for a week? Um, and so I like to start off by, these systems can kind of fail unexpectedly. And so, uh, about a year ago, the city of Richmond, Virginia, the capital of Virginia in the US, they lost their water supply. So people woke up with no water. They couldn't brush their teeth, they couldn't flush their toilets, they couldn't take a shower. People were melting snow just so they can have some access to water because it happened so suddenly. What happened was there was a winter storm that took out power to the water treatment plant, and there was a mechanical failure that flooded the whole plant, took the whole thing offline. We're talking schools shut down, businesses shut down. The National Guard was called out to set up water supply stations and distribute bottled water. Water was out for about a week total. And, everything worked out fine. I mean, this is kind of the standard playbook when something like this happens. There were no, deaths, probably not even any illnesses, and people were able to laugh and joke about it. But it illustrates that, for most people, you can see the line in the at the water supply truck. Most people aren't prepared to have their the water that is piped into their house, or the waste that are just taken away, or the energy that we rely on taken away without and be able to survive, because we need these items. And so I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but these are just some of the what I think of as the core needs for human life. I mean, we've, shelter, water, food, health, security, and I like to think of it's all we've got community at the core, because in the end we're social beings, and we need that community connectedness uh to survive. And I think, in our group breakout, we were talking a little bit about right wing, kind of taking ownership of prepping in a lot of spaces, but solidarity prepping puts community first, that we're not like these, isolated individuals in bunkers, but trying to build community in the process. And so, thinking of community at the core, we really want to think about strengthening community bonds. And, here we are on an international Zoom call, but in the some sort of natural disaster or other emergency that takes away our technology and modern conveniences, your community is effectively the people that you can walk to. And so you may not be able to drive across town. And so having some connection with the people that you live around, not necessarily being their best friends or that being your only community, but being visible in the neighborhood, getting to know people at some level, uh, that so that you're not strangers. And so, because community requires trust, and trust requires familiarity. And certainly, um, we can focus on, I like the idea of micro interactions, because the, uh, uh, you know, research is showing that micro interactions, not only does it help us feel more grounded in our community, but it also is a positive benefit for our own mental health. And so, you could limit it there, or just engage in neighborhood activities or organize social events. You can broaden it as much as you want, or it could be just you sit outside on your porch and see your neighbors, or walk around the neighborhood and say hello to people. But you want to kind of think about building community with your immediate neighbors early, before you have some sort of emergency where you may be relying on each other. And, once you have familiarity, I like this idea of overcoming adversity loves company. There's great stories about where people have really come together and bonded to get through some sort of natural disaster or other emergency, to rely on each other, and the variety of skills and resources that people bring to the table to support each other, and help their neighborhood and community recover. But moving into some of the more nuts and bolts about preparedness, I like to think of it as what we see when we're on an airplane, and they talk about, like, if the oxygen mask drop, it's like, put yours on first. before you help anyone else because you want to be prepared. You want to be um, capable of helping others and not vulnerable yourself. And to do that, you have to invest in your own skills and capabilities and preparedness. And so, shelter is one of the first things we think about. Fortunately, we're probably all housed appropriately. But what we really lose when we lose power and water and other features is we lose the climate control of our buildings. And so we've seen that in recent years. This was in 2021, we saw both the heat dome in the Pacific Northwest, and we saw a winter storm that caused the power outage for the state of Texas. And in both instances, people were unable it led to increase in death rates because of those two events, one due to heat, one due to hypothermia and other cold related um, uh, cold related problems. And now people live all around the world without the benefit of the, you know, uh, uh, climate control that we get from, living in the West in the Northern Hemisphere. And so there are low-tech ways to stay warm, things like creating small insulated spaces, you know, s- secure your body heat. Don't want to burn anything because there's a risk of carbon monoxide and fire and other issues. On the cool side, uh, people are doing, stay hydrated, limit activity during the hottest part of the day, try to be active during the evening and the morning, find shaded spots, good air circulation. Um, and try to do it with a community rather than just sitting in a cold, dark house by yourself. You know, body heat's a great way to stay warm. Get a bunch of neighbors together and, spend time together. Same thing about kind of can't do anything. It's hot, power's out, spend some time outside in a shaded area. The other thing with shelters, you got to think about fire. And we really don't think much about fire. We've had a great system for managing fire uh, of buildings and property, but during blackouts, that risk increases. And so people start getting, um, uh, uh, you know, they don't manage fire well. They use it for heat or light or cooking. And then the next thing there's a fire. And now this event that happened in Baltimore back in 2025 was not during any sort of event. This was just someone was uh, managed, to light their house on fire. It took out a 15 row homes in a block. It took over 100 firefighters to put it out. And so, fire, we forget about these major fires that occurred in Chicago and San Francisco and London at the turn of the century. But, fire in urban and suburban areas can be quite devastating. And particularly when there's not the resources to put it out that we rely on. Uh, Switching over, and I know I'm going kind of fast. I don't want to take up a ton of time. On water resilience, the two main considerations are how much and the quality. So generally, we need about 1 gallon per person per day for cooking and drinking. We certainly need more for hygiene. And then, is it safe to drink? And you really kind of just have to assume that all natural sources of water require treatment. But that's not too difficult. And I'll go through some simple ways to treat water. For planning for an outage, you can certainly store some water, but water's bulky, takes up a lot of space. Um, One of the things that I like to recommend to people, if you have access to your hot water heater, you've got 30 to 50 gallons of water in there that's perfectly potable and safe to drink. So if you've got a power outage, you just need to turn that off, close the valves, and you can drain it out the bottom. And you've got a nice handy water supply that's just sitting ready for you with no additional storage taking up space. But that's going to be limited anyway. Um, uh, Something that's a little bit more renewable is a rain barrel. Now, certainly this is going to range in its utility for people depending on where you live. I know, Dawn, you're in Tucson, Arizona, so that's going to be, you know, you have to think about things a little differently down there. I'm in a place that we get rain every couple of weeks, and so um, being able to collect rainwater is a great source of generally clean water. If you know you can use water from any stream or surface water, but you want to try to make it sure that it's as free flowing and doesn't have any obvious contamination. So typical water contaminants, the ones that we're most concerned with on an immediate basis is going to be things like pathogens, something that's going to make you sick. Sediment and dirt can harbor pathogens, and so that's why we want to remove it. Then we're also concerned about chemicals and inorganic materials that could be hazardous. In general, if the water that you're finding doesn't have a strong smell, no color, doesn't particularly taste bad, then you're generally in pretty good shape. You don't want to pull water from something that's got a major algal bloom happening or that has an oily sheen on it or smells of petroleum. Uh, you know, uh, so, uh, but because you can really treat dirt and pathogens, and that's really the focus of kind of home water treatment. And how do we treat it? So, so really, we want to filter and disinfect. And so, if your source has some visible sediment in it, you might want to do some sort of pre-filter. This could be a coffee filter, fabric, um, sponges, even something to remove that larger particle. And then I recommend a backpacking or camping microfilter. And so this it removes bacteria and most pathogens. Um, there's a gravity version of this, and then there's one that you pump. I recommend the gravity version because uh, filters a gallon of water in a few minutes. It doesn't take much effort. If you're trying to create a lot of water, the pump versions get really tiresome. And these are good for really thousands of gallons of water. You want it to be as clear as possible going into this, hence the pre-filter, so that your filter lasts as long as possible. Now, what the filter doesn't take out really is viruses. And so uh, chlorine bleach is the best option to do some disinfectant. You only need a few drops per gallon or liter. Drop it in, wait a few minutes to allow it to react. The double benefit of this, it'll kill any remaining bacteria or viruses, and it also leaves a residual disinfection or disinfectant in the water so you can store it for a period of time without worrying about pathogens regrowing. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell in typical treatment. Kind of moving over to health and safety. And really, I like to recommend training for anything related to first aid because I think a lot of times, particularly in America, we get pushed just buy things. And your first aid kit is useless if you don't know how to use it. And you don't want to be learning how to use it when someone's sitting there bleeding in front of you. And there's a lot of great training options available. Stop the Bleed is a short online program that you could also supplement with some in-person training. There's standard first aid training from like Red Cross. I've done the wilderness first aid training. There's also wilderness first responder. And there's a growing availability of mental health first aid. And when you think about it from a standpoint of a traumatic event, there are certain things that can be done in the immediate aftermath of those traumatic events to help reduce, the potential for PTSD and long-term trauma. And of course, you know, with training, have a first aid kit available for treating common ailments from accidents or injuries. And then when you're thinking about health and safety, think about your own personal health needs because, it's one thing if you're a 20-year-old who's perfectly healthy and has no issues versus someone who may have a chronic condition versus someone who's maybe pregnant or, maybe you rely on medications or, think through those. And there's not always an easy solution, but you don't want to ignore that. And then also, a community benefit, health and safety, first aid helps everyone. And then just kind of like a closing slide on kind of the resilience mindset, so because we're really thinking about loss. So we've got all these systems and services that we rely on. And so how long can I live without it? Is there an alternative to whatever it is that I need? So, for example, um, people who may use a CPAP for sleep apnea, uh, you know, what would be your alternative to that? Is there something that doesn't require power, or maybe I need a small solar gen set to manage that so I don't have an emergency during a power outage? And that gets into what are specific vulnerabilities for ourselves and our household to think about. Think about pets, think about, the other people that rely on us. Uh, yeah, want to recommend to focus on empowerment, skill building, capabilities, rather than just stuff, which is, really heavy in the prepper world. And then this idea of integrating resilience into normal life so that if you store some food, cook that food. Don't just buy something that you just set aside and never think about. Integrate those foods into your regular recipes so that it's, you can be as seamless as possible when you've got to rely on that because you can't go to the grocery store. So, uh, so, so uh, that's my last slide, and look forward to any questions.
I know that we've got a question straight away from Samuel, possibly more than one. If you do have a question for Ben, or if you just want to reflect on anything you've heard, you can raise your digital hand by using the React button at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see there that there's an option to raise your digital hand. So I'll come to you first, Samuel, and then, yeah, anyone else with questions, please do raise your hand. Go ahead, Samuel.
Hey, thank you, Ben, for the presentation. So the first one I already have typed out here, and it's just, is there any benefit to sourcing water below a dam? Like, does that help with the filtration? Is that going to be less chemically polluted than above a dam?
Uh, Yeah, that's a good question. Mostly the nice thing about getting water from, say, below a dam is it's free flowing. If you're, pulling it from even a pretty clean lake, you're getting it from shore, and so it could be swampy and more likely to have algal blooms and such. There is a benefit of getting water that's free flowing because it's going to have just algae is really the main thing that you want to avoid. Um, uh, because there are some species of cyanobacteria that create toxins, and they're kind of hard to see and understand when they're blooming unless you kind of study, you know, limnology and are familiar with, cyanobacteria blooms. But yeah, normally a clear, free flowing water is the key.
Are there any other questions for Ben?
There's a few in the chat. Do you want me to just kind of go through those?
That would be great.
Okay. All right. So, VJ asked about water for flushing a toilet and how much. And so the honestly, what you can do, most is like 1.6 gallon flushes. But what you want to bear in mind that if you are limited in your water, you don't want to use it to flush your toilet. You want to use it to drink. Um, if you don't have any water and we talked about this last time, in backpacking, what you do are called cat holes, where you basically dig a hole and dispose of your waste and bury it if you had to. But usually a few gallons of water are plenty enough to flush a toilet. Um, Noreen asked about disinfecting water inside a rain barrel, and typically that's not done because a lot of times people might be using their rain barrels to water plants as well, and so the uh, I would say probably just wait to disinfect your water after you've filtered it, and so that you're only needing to disinfect a small amount of water that you need to drink. Because if you're using it for other things, it doesn't need to be disinfected. If you're using it for gardening, even if you're using it for washing your hands, or if you're using it for cooking and boiling water, that disinfects it. And so you really don't need to add chlorine for that either. Um, Let's see. Carol asked about the slides. I can definitely send David and Kat the slides so they can distribute it if
Thank you, Ben. That would be helpful.
Chris had an interesting question about seawater. Um, there, so the seawater, the only way to make that drinkable is through evaporation and effectively distilling. And so, you there are some ways to use evaporation to do that on a small scale. Uh, they they can be kind of complicated for seawater because what you're going to be left with is a lot of salts, and so um, the typical yeah, so that gets really hard. I've looked for a low tech, inexpensive seawater desalinant, like evaporative device, and I haven't found one. There are some very expensive ones that are used on emergency boats on ships, uh, but they're hundreds of dollars and rather complex.
Thanks, Ben. There was a question a little bit higher up from Sue around drinking water bought in plastic bottles after the expiry date. Maples answered that by saying no limit. Um, but I would just add to that. All plastics will deteriorate in sunlight. So if they're stored out of direct sunlight, absolutely drink them forever and a day. If the plastic is exposed to sunlight or even too much heat, it will start to break down, releasing chemicals into the water, which have long-term health impacts. Under a context of survival in collapse, perhaps we're not worried about cancers that might emerge in 10 or 15 or 20 years later. But yes, if you're storing water in plastic, I'm lucky enough to have a large freezer. So I keep the bladders from wine boxes and I wash them and fill them with water and I freeze them. So I keep probably about 120 liters of water frozen in my big deep freeze, and it maintains the temperature of the freezer as well if the power goes out. So a two for one. Thanks. Sorry, Ben, to interject.
Oh, no, no. This is yeah, no, that's great. That's a great use. And yeah, you're very right. I mean, we've contaminated much of our environment. People hear about forever chemicals, the PFAS compounds, but a lot of them, like you said, Kat, is, long-term usage, and ultimately increasing your risk of cancers and other things. Um, in a collapse immediately in a collapse environment, you're concerned about you don't want to get dysentery, you don't want to get something that's going to impact your survivability in the near term.
Exactly. All right.
Gail had a question on Brita filters. Brita filters are great. They're designed. They're not designed for removing fine particulates or disinfecting for pathogens. So they're really removing some of the trace elements in and organic compounds that might be in water. So think of them as a polishing step.
Yeah. Um, and Ben, you mentioned bleach before. You can buy water purification tablets that have really, really long shelf lives and they're not expensive. And they're very prescriptive about one tablet for 10 gallons, etc. So think about having a stock of them or a store of them so that once you've been through your cleaning process and you've filtered and you've got water that you need to prepare for drinking, you can purify it. But I think, as Ben already said, you only need pure water for drinking. Everything else, as long as it's not dirty or smelly, will be fine for cooking or bathing or washing your clothing. And Maple says she has a 1 minute quick show and tell. Maple, do you want to do that now? And then we'll go to Anna's question.
Sure. I saw this thing on YouTube, so I bought it. It's not expensive. You buy a paint can, an empty paint can, because the paint cans with paint would have, chemicals that might blow up or whatever. But it's like a big one that was $10, and then you put sand in there, some sand in it, like maybe about half full. And then you have a smaller paint can that's going to go inside of it, and you stuff. I saw a guy on YouTube do this. This is where I got it. You stuff a part, like a third used toilet roll in there. Not the full one, doesn't quite fit. And then you pour this stuff. You want to buy it ahead of time. Denatured alcohol slowly into the toilet paper thing, and it acts like a wick. The toilet paper doesn't flame and burn up. It acts like a wick. And then you keep it, and then when you need to use it, you have the smaller can inside the sand can. And then you can, it supposedly gives heat for like hours and hours. They said it's a good heater, and it's like a blue flame. And then and they said you can put sticks into the sand, like 3 or 4 sticks into the big one, and then invert the cover on, and it goes on the sticks like this, and you can cook stuff on that.
So you can use it for boiling water for drinking,
Right.
for argument's sake, as well as
Yeah.
creating warmth.
Supposedly lasts a long time, so I thought I'd share that. It was pretty cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Maple. Anne, you had a question, or your hand was raised. Did you want to ask a question of Ben?
Yes, I kind of hesitate to ask this question, but it's been on my mind ever since the beginning of this group. I have gotten to know most of the people in my neighborhood. I'm acquainted with almost everyone. And I really want to build a sense of community. What I have found is that the large majority are in COVID denial, are against vaccinations, and there's this general kind of virus denial thing going on. So I'm not, especially if we have a pandemic coming again, or in any of these disaster situations, that kind of virus denial is really, really worrying me about creating community and connections. I'm wondering if you have a comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, we live in interesting times. I mean, we can't even agree on what reality is, it seems sometimes. The and we certainly see this with climate change, and it's easy for some people to just deny that it exists, and that has just spilled over into other aspects of our lives. I think, I guess I would say, in some respects, natural disasters, it is tangible. And you can't deny when tornado has come through and destroyed buildings and taken out power. Now, some people may not be willing or interested in being prepared for such an event, but after the fact, when people don't have power or water or other critical services, I think they would be, pretty amenable to cooperating in that environment. But yes, trying to get people on board beforehand, even if they're not in denial about what's going on, a lot of people are just busy and it's not a focus for them. I'm sorry that, yeah, that sounds like a tough situation.
Thank you. Jessica, I think you're next. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you, Kat. David. I wanted to, yeah, to respond to the last concern about community and different politics and different understandings of reality, because we have gone through a Category 5 hurricane in Dominica 8 years ago and had no grid for 10 months. So certainly we have lived through that kind of event. And one of the things about a disaster is a lot of the politics just gets dropped, right away. It's survival. And it really is, as Ben was saying, it's about your immediate concerns. And especially if you have built up some relationship and rapport with your neighbors, then people do come together very easily and very intentionally to help support one another. So I would say I wouldn't wait, even if your neighbors are politically a different color or have different religious backgrounds, or find ways to come together, in that are not about those things, whether it's a movie night or whether you're going to work on a community project or something. I think it's a muscle that you need to exercise and flex, before disaster hits, because then it's much easier to know who you can count on, who has some understanding of healthcare, who has understanding of, water supply or whatever. And then things are much easier in terms of a community response. But I wouldn't hold out fears about what people are thinking today and how redneck they are or how, out of it they are on certain issues, because it's really not about that when things start to collapse. It's really about, we need to support each other to get through this. Okay.
Thanks, Jessica. Such an important point. And moving into the conversation that I hoped we would have after Ben's presentation. So I'd like to acknowledge Ben. Thank you for taking the time to put some slides together. Thank you for
Welcome.
sharing a little bit from your experience. The plan now, as you know, we'll be finishing as we often do at half past the hour. So the plan, and I'd like us to have at least 10 minutes together before we say farewell. So I think we're going to go into breakout rooms. I think given the number of people, uh, we might be better with three groups rather than two, because that reduces the numbers a little bit and it gives everyone a chance to speak. But the prompt for the question, thanks, Sue, if you need to leave. The prompt for your conversation is to do exactly what we've just been doing in a large group. So to reflect on what you have heard, to think about how does what Ben has shared with you apply in your context and how you might make use of that. I'll just remind you that all the way through our time together, you have spent a lot of time unearthing your own vulnerabilities and your curiosities, and this is the bit where we start learning from one another. And so do take the next 20 minutes in your breakout rooms to really just explore together. What have you heard? How are you impacted by that? What are some small steps that you might be able to take based on the information that Ben and indeed others through their questions and answers have shared? Is that clear for everybody? We have just a few minutes together now before we finish off, and I'm going to occupy the last couple of minutes by just reminding you all that building relationships takes practice, and the ground we share here every second Saturday is good practice. So if you feel that there is something that you know that you're good at, VJ has been keeping secrets from us about her expertise with rain barrels. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical, practical solution or whether it's ways and mechanisms that you use for managing your nervous system or a spiritual practice you have that you find helpful, anything that is part of your personal preparation, part of how you are responding to collapse. If there's anything that you can talk about, please do let myself or David or Susan know. Reach out to any of us. If you're anxious because Ben did such an amazing job of creating very professional looking slides, don't be. If you want a hand putting together a slideshow, I will work with you and help you to do that. So yeah, please do give some thought to things that you might want to share on. Jessica, it would be wonderful to hear you speak here about your experience post storm in your home island and about some of the observations that you made. That would be wonderful to hear that story here. So yeah, do give that some thought and reach out. We've got speakers for the next 3 or 4 sessions, I think, but it would be great to have a long list of us stretching out into the rest of the summer and beyond. So, for the last few moments, I would invite you to just, does anybody have anything that really stood out for them from today's session? Something that Ben shared that made you feel a little moment of, oh, I can. I'm going to give it a go, or anything you heard in your conversations together. What are you taking with you? And I'm not going to tell you you all have to speak, but it would be lovely to hear from a handful of you at least. What are you taking with you after today's session?
Ben reminded me that I actually have a campsite water purifier bag and filter somewhere, and it would be good if I knew where it was. So I'm going to go find it. Thank you, Ben, for your excellent comprehensive presentation. VJ, I think
I was reminded about how to integrate resilience into my normal life. So I'm going to start pretending that, no power. What do I do? So, and then also personal health needs. I have to consider this and make sure, it's like I have a go bag, but it's not enough. It's like I need a stay bag now.
Well, I
Great,
was
thank you.
glad to hear from Margot mentioned that Nate Hagen has a good review on Frankly 132. So that might be good to watch. And plus, I did check with our town mayor, if they have a plan for, say, welfare. Oh yeah, we're all good. But I'm thinking maybe I should follow up and see just kind of what kind of things do they have, and maybe like little things. I don't think they've got first aid courses running very often. Little ideas, if he's open to ideas, it wouldn't hurt to talk with him every once in a while. Well, that would be a good idea to be involved with local authorities or local leaders, if they are a leader at all, if they're open to that.
Wonderful, thanks.
I took a couple of things away, Ben, from your presentation and our conversation. One is I'm the queen of stuff is something I can afford and I can offer our community from having Starlink to lots of water and all that. But the actual rehearsal of how to use it to and do it with other people in our community. Let's play. The grid has gone down today. Where are the handheld radios? Where is that? How do I use this? I just haven't done that. And the others, I've been meaning to do that first aid course, even if it's the one online, for a long time. And it now rose to the top of my list. Thank you.
Excellent, Margot.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ben, for that wonderful presentation. Just so clear and actionable. I've got a full page of more notes that I'm going to have to pursue, which I'm very grateful for. And to many of you who've offered some really practical ideas and things. I love the campfire in a paint can, whatever. I'm going to do a lot of Googling here. And then we had some great conversation about what to do with our own human waste and very practical ideas. So just a wonderful session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for your presentation. What will stick with me is the things that I also like to reinforce, which is building trust. You know, knowing your neighbors and building trust. I think that's really the foundation of any kind of solidarity and any kind of preparedness. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and I guess I would like to echo, and well, thanks again for all the kind words, but Jessica, I would also echo like wanting to hear you all's experience, particularly through, I guess it was what, Hurricane Maria that that you all lived through, and some of the things that you've done on self-sufficiency. I live in an urban area, so it's I have to pretend. So
Yeah, sure.
fortunately, I haven't
I
had
think we'd be
to
happy
live
to.
through
I
a
got to
natural
rope Tim into that
disaster.
presentation too. But yeah, definitely
How much time do we have right now?
well, no, we don't have time now. That's a whole other thing. Definitely when we get into our low season, I would love to share that.
One thing I was going to say, I said it in the small room. I'll say it in the bigger room. Listening to it was very helpful information. I just feel that I've been doing this for 15 years, living off grid and harvesting water from the ground and the solar energy and doing everything to be as self-sufficient as possible and making community relationships. But it's really difficult. It's not easy. It can be fun when I have lots of time to do it, but when you're under pressure, it becomes really even more difficult. And then I was also wanted to say that even when we get everything together working really well, it falls apart pretty quickly too. And so I'm thinking even my solar, we're outside of the supply chain already. We're on a little island in the ocean. So when that goes, I'm just going to live without a power because I'll never get the little components to keep it going and all kinds of stuff. So it's a slow process. It's a very difficult process. It's not super easy. And I think when we're at the stage where we're really worried about what to do with our human waste, there's a lot of other things that have that have gotten in the way by that point. You'll probably be pretty comfortable just shitting in the road, to say the least. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's a lot that comes before that particular concern.
I wanted to ask, didn't Michael Dowd do an interview with you guys, or was it you, David? Someone had a huge. I remember you guys being interviewed, and your big tragedy and how you lived through it. Who
Yes,
was it?
both. I sat down with David and also Michael Dowd, the late Michael Dowd, a few years ago. So if you Google my name on YouTube with Michael Dowd's name or with David's name, the video should come up on YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, David's been great getting information out and organizing people.
And he still is. Look at him go. All right, we're 2 minutes away from the time when we would normally finish. So I think we're all sorted for next time. Please do think about what you might talk about or share. There's a lot of wisdom in this group. I know there is because I've spent a lot of time with all of you over the last few months. So please give some thought to what you would be able to share. Do reach out and get in touch. Even those of you who are now looking behind you and going, she surely doesn't mean me. I absolutely do. No one gets away with it. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for having the courage and the wherewithal to keep coming back and having conversations that, it has to be said, are heavy and an environment that feels like wading through treacle. Bless you all. It's lovely to spend time with you. Feel free to unmute and express your appreciation and say ta-da to one another.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you for
much.
joining us
Thank
today.
you.
Everybody.
Stay safe.
Bye, Tina.
I do aloha, aloha nui loa.